In this example, I need to identify the quadrant or quadrants for the angles satisfying the following conditions. I know that the sine of theta is greater than 0 and the secant of theta is less than 0. Now I'm going to complete this problem by two different methods. Method 1, I use the definition of the trigonometric functions in terms of x, y, and r. Remember, the sine of theta is y over r, the cosine of theta is x over r, and the tangent of theta is y over x. Now remember, the value of r in these definitions, r is always positive or greater than 0. So looking at our first condition, I know the sine of theta, which equals y over r, is greater than 0 or positive. Since r is always positive, this expression here can only be positive when y is greater than 0. And in which quadrants over here is the y value positive or greater than 0? Those are the quadrants above the x-axis. So that is true in quadrant 1 and in quadrant 2. Now let's look at the second condition. The secant of theta. Remember, the secant of theta is 1 divided by the cosine of theta. So it's the reciprocal of this fraction, so it's just r over x. And I know the secant of theta is less than 0 or it's negative. And when is that going to happen? Remember, r is always positive, so r over x is negative when x is less than 0. And in which quadrants are the x values negative or less than 0? Those are the quadrants to the left of the y-axis. So those are true in quadrant 2 and in quadrant 3. So in which quadrant or quadrants are both of these conditions true? Well, that's up here in quadrant 2. So I know that theta lies in quadrant 2. So if I drew this angle in standard position, its terminal side would lie somewhere up here in quadrant 2. And now looking at the other method, method 2, I'm going to use the mnemonic all students take calculus. Remember, all goes in quadrant 1, students, quadrant 2, take, quadrant 3, calculus, quadrant 4. And what do these stand for? In quadrant 1, all means all 6 trig functions are positive. In quadrant 2, the S in students stands for the sine of theta and its reciprocal, the cosecant of theta, are positive. Everybody else is negative. In quadrant 3, the T in take stands for the tangent of theta and its reciprocal, the cotangent of theta, are positive. Everybody else is negative. And calculus in quadrant 4, the C stands for the cosine of theta and its reciprocal, the secant of theta, are positive. Everybody else is negative. Now looking at our conditions, I know the sine of theta is greater than 0 or it's positive. In which quadrants is the sine of theta positive? It's positive here in quadrant 1. It's also positive here in quadrant 2. So this is true in quadrant 1 and in quadrant 2. Next, I know that the secant of theta is less than 0. It's negative. Well, in which quadrants is the secant of theta positive? It's positive here in quadrant 1 and in quadrant 4, so it has to be negative in quadrant 2 and in quadrant 3. Well, when are both of these conditions true? What do they have in common? They both have quadrant 2 in common. So I know that theta lies in quadrant 2. Now, does it matter which method you use to solve this problem? No, they both work equally well.